The bar was loud that night, the kind of noise that swallowed individual voices and turned them into a tide of sound. Neon beer signs cast red and blue shadows across faces flushed with alcohol and bravado. In the back corner, near the pool table where cue sticks cracked against resin balls, Lieutenant Commander Iris Kale sat alone with a glass of whiskey she hadn't touched. She wore jeans and a faded university sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Nothing about her suggested what she was. Nothing about her invited attention. That was exactly how she preferred it. But preference and reality rarely aligned in places like this, especially not in bars 3 miles from Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, where egos inflated with every drink and territorial instincts ran as deep as the Atlantic outside. The Marine who shoved her didn't mean it as an assault, not exactly. He was turning from the bar with 4 beers balanced between his hands, his attention on his buddies at the dartboard, his body moving with the careless confidence of someone who'd never had to watch his six in a place like this. His shoulder caught hers hard enough to send her stumbling 2 steps sideways. The whiskey glass tipped but didn't fall. She caught it with the reflexes of someone trained to react in fractions of seconds. He glanced back, his eyes taking her in with the kind of assessment that lasted less than a heartbeat. Young woman, alone, civilian clothes, no threat. He smirked and turned away without a word. His friends saw it happen. One of them, a corporal with a high-end tight haircut so fresh the skin still looked raw, called out something that might have been an apology but sounded more like amusement. The Marine who'd done the shoving just laughed and kept walking. Iris set the glass down carefully. Her hand was steady. Her expression hadn't changed. But something in the air shifted, a tension so subtle that only someone trained to read rooms full of hostile operators would notice. The bartender, a former Navy chief with gray stubble and tired eyes, noticed. He'd been watching her since she walked in an hour ago, nodding the way she moved, the way she scanned exits, the way she sat with her back to the wall and her peripheral vision covering the room. He knew what she was even if nobody else did. Now he watched the Marine's back disappear into the crowd and looked at Iris with an expression that might have been concern or curiosity. She met his gaze for half a second, then looked away. Not tonight, the glance said. Let it go, but the universe had other plans. The Marine's voice rose above the noise 20 minutes later, competing with a jukebox playing something with too much bass and not enough melody. He was talking about Afghanistan, about Helmand Province, about a firefight near Sangin where his platoon had called in close air support and watched Navy jets light up a compound with precision strikes that saved their lives. His words carried the weight of genuine respect, the kind warriors reserved for other warriors even across service rivalries. But then his tone shifted, souring like milk left in sun. He started talking about the pilots, about how they were all hot shots sitting in air-conditioned cockpits while grunts ate dust and bled. How they'd fly their missions and go back to carriers with hot meals and clean sheets. How they'd never understand what it meant to hold ground with nothing but rifle and body armor between you and eternity. His friends laughed, agreeing with the tribal loyalty that bonded Marines together and often set them against everyone else. They didn't see Iris stand up. They didn't notice her walk toward them until she was already there, appearing at the edge of their circle like smoke taking form. The Marine turned and saw her, his expression cycling through confusion to recognition to something that might have been embarrassment but hadn't quite arrived. Up close, even in civilian clothes, something about her read military. It was in the posture, the economy of movement, the eyes that assessed without seeming to look. You were talking about close air support in Helmand, she said. Her voice was quiet, barely audible over the bar noise, but it cut through anyway. The Marine blinked. His friends went silent, sensing drama or confrontation, both equally valuable as entertainment. He recovered his swagger quickly, straightening to his full height, which gave him maybe 4 inches on her. Yeah, he said. Why, you got something to say about it. Iris didn't smile, didn't frown. Her expression remained neutral, almost bored, which somehow made her more intimidating than anger would have. I was just wondering which missions you were talking about, she said. Specifically. The specificity threw him. He'd been telling war stories, not giving tactical debriefs. "I don't know, lady. It was years ago. Why does it matter?" She nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something. "It matters because I might have been one of those pilots you're talking about, the ones in air-conditioned cockpits." The silence spread now, rippling out from their circle to nearby tables. Someone turned the jukebox down. The Marine's face went through several expressions at once, none of them landing. His corporal friend stepped forward, trying to diffuse. "Ma'am, we didn't mean any disrespect. We were just talking, blowing off steam." "I know what you were doing," Iris said. Her tone hadn't changed, still quiet, still level. "I've done it myself. The rivalry between services is older than any of us. But when you talk about pilots like we're tourists taking aerial photos while you do the real work, you're talking about me. And I was there. Helmand Province. Summer of 2013. Maybe you remember a mission where your platoon got pinned down in a compound near Sangin. Taliban had you surrounded on 3 sides. Your air controller called in strikes on danger-close targets. Bombs landed less than 100 meters from your position." The Marine's face changed. The swagger drained out of him like water from cracked glass. He remembered. How could he not remember? That day had been written in fire and sound, in the screaming of jets overhead and the earth-shaking thunder of ordnance finding targets so close he'd felt the concussion in his chest. "That was you," he said, and his voice had gone quiet too. Iris shook her head. "Not just me. I was lead on a 2-ship. My wingman was a lieutenant junior grade on his 4th deployment. Together, we put 17 bombs on coordinates your JTAC gave us while taking ground fire from multiple positions. We stayed on station for 40 minutes past our fuel reserve because your platoon needed coverage for extract. We landed on fumes." The bar had gone completely silent now. Even the bartender had stopped moving, standing frozen with a beer glass in one hand and a towel in the other. The Marine stared at her, and something fundamental was recalibrating behind his eyes. "I didn't know," he said finally. "How would you?" Iris replied. "You were on the ground doing your job. We were in the air doing ours. That's how it works." She should have left it there. Should have turned and walked away, point made, lesson delivered. But she didn't. Instead she said, "Do you know who I am?" It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question, asked with the kind of curiosity someone might use when wondering if they'd been recognized at a grocery store. The Marine shook his head. The corporal did too. All of them just stared. Iris reached into her back pocket and pulled out a thin leather wallet. From it she extracted a military ID card and held it up so they could see. The photo matched her face. The rank made them straighten unconsciously. Lieutenant Commander 04. Naval Aviator. But it was the next part that made their expressions change completely. She put the ID away and said, "I'm the commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 217, VFA 217, the Red Lions. I've been flying FA-18 Super Hornets for 11 years. Before that, I flew Hornets. Before that, I was an instructor pilot at Meridian teaching Nuggets how not to kill themselves during carrier quals. I have 2,000 hours in tactical aircraft, 600 carrier traps, and 4 combat deployments. I've provided close air support to Marine units in 3 countries. I've dropped ordnance in anger on 17 different missions. I've been shot at by surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft artillery, and small arms fire. I've had a hydraulic failure at night over the ocean with 0 visibility and landed on a pitching deck with a 30-degree crosswind. I've lost friends to flight deck accidents, to mechanical failures, to enemy fire. I've written letters to their families. I've folded flags at their memorials. I've stood on carriers and watched the sun rise over oceans where Americans fought and bled and died to keep sea lanes open and allies safe. And I did all of that while people questioned whether I belonged there because of my gender, my size, my age, or whatever other reason they could find to doubt me." The Marine's face had gone pale. His friends looked like they wanted to disappear into the floorboards. Iris continued, her voice still quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority now. "I'm not telling you this to humiliate you. I'm telling you this so you understand that the people you dismiss, the pilots you think have it easy, are warriors just like you. We train differently. We fight differently. We face different dangers. but we bleed the same red and we serve the same flag. When you called in that strike in Sangin, you trusted that the pilot on the other end of that radio knew what they were doing. You trusted that they'd put steel on target without hitting you. You trusted that they'd stay as long as you needed them, even if it meant putting themselves at risk. That trust goes both ways. I trust Marines to hold ground so we have safe zones to operate from. I trust SCALS to get intelligence so we know what to hit. I trust soldiers to secure territory so we can base forward. We're all part of the same fight. She paused, letting the words settle. Then she said, so when you shove someone in a bar without looking, when you make assumptions about who matters and who doesn't based on what they're wearing or how they look, remember that you might be standing next to someone who saved your life and you'd never know it. The Marine found his voice, though it came out rough. Ma'am, I apologize. Sincerely, I was out of line. Iris nodded. Apology accepted. Buy me a beer and we'll call it even. The tension broke like a snapped wire. The Marine practically ran to the bar, returning with a fresh bottle that he handed over with the kind of deference usually reserved for much higher ranks. The corporal extended his hand. Corporal Davis, ma'am. 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines. It's an honor. She shook his hand. Iris Kale, and it's just Iris when I'm not in uniform. They talked for the next hour, the conversation flowing from war stories to tactical discussions to the kind of shit-talking that warriors used as affection. Iris matched them drink for drink and story for story, her civilian clothes no longer a disguise but irrelevant to the fundamental recognition that had occurred. These were her people, regardless of service branch or specialty. They spoke the same language, understood the same stakes, carried the same weight. The bartender eventually came over, the former chief with gray stubble. He set down a fresh round without being asked and said to Iris, "Your money's no good here tonight, Commander. Not after that." Iris smiled for the first time since walking into the bar. "What gave me away?" The bartender tapped the side of his head. 30 years in the Navy, you learn to read people. Plus, I saw your tattoo when you reached for your ID. Shellback and golden wings, dead giveaway. She'd forgotten about the tattoo, a small rendering of an anchor and wings on her inner forearm, mostly hidden by her sleeve. Caught me, she admitted. Good eye. The night wore on. The bar filled and emptied and filled again with the tidal rhythm of military towns everywhere. Sailors came and went, soldiers, airmen, Marines, all of them orbiting each other in the complex dance of inter-service respect and rivalry. Iris stayed longer than she'd planned, anchored by conversation, and the rare pleasure of being among people who understood without explanation. When she finally left, walking out into humid Virginia night air that smelled of salt water and cut grass, the Marine who'd shoved her followed her to the parking lot. She turned, one eyebrow raised in question. He stood there for a moment, clearly wrestling with words. Finally he said, "I'm going to tell that story, ma'am, about tonight, about meeting you, about what you said." "That's fine," Iris replied. "But do me a favor, don't make me the hero of it. I'm not special. There are hundreds of pilots just like me, men and women, doing the same job every day. They don't get recognition because that's not why we do it. We do it because someone has to and we're trained for it. If you tell the story, tell it so people understand that. The warriors they see are just the visible part. There are thousands more you never see, and they're just as committed, just as skilled, just as willing to sacrifice." The Marine nodded slowly. "I understand, ma'am," she smiled. "Good, now get back inside before your buddies drink all your beer." He grinned and turned back toward the bar. Iris climbed into her truck, a battered Ford Ranger that had seen better decades. The engine turned over with a reluctant cough, and she sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from her executive officer, Commander Ramirez. Just one line. "Admin brief at 800, don't be late." She typed back. "When have I ever been late?" His response came immediately. "First time for everything, Skipper." She smiled and put the phone away. The drive back to base housing took 15 minutes through streets mostly empty at this hour. Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek sprawled across Virginia Beach's northern coast, home to SEAL teams, naval special warfare units, and various training commands. Her squadron wasn't permanently based here. They'd flown in from Naval Air Station Oceana 12 miles south for a joint training exercise with Marine Special Operations Command. 2 weeks of coordinated operations, practicing close air support with Marine raiders, hunting the integration between aviation and ground forces that made American military power so devastatingly effective. She'd spent the day in briefings, discussing tactics and coordination procedures, reviewing lessons learned from recent deployments. Dry work but essential. The kind of preparation that saved lives when things went kinetic. Tonight she wanted to decompress, to step away from rank and responsibility and just be a person drinking whiskey in a bar. Instead, she'd ended up giving an impromptu speech on service and sacrifice to a Marine who'd learned a lesson the hard way. Not how she'd planned the evening, but not terrible either. Base housing was quiet, rows of identical townhouses with identical lawns under identical streetlights. Officers on one end, enlisted on the other, everyone separated by rank even in sleep. Iris pulled into her assigned spot and killed the engine. The silence rushed in, replacing the truck's rattle with the chirp of crickets and the distant sound of helicopters running maintenance cycles at the flight line. She sat there for a moment longer, letting the day drain away. Tomorrow would be another brief, another planning session, another step in the endless cycle of training and preparation that defined military aviation. But tonight had been different. Tonight she'd been reminded why she wore the uniform, why she spent hours in cockpits and simulators, why she'd chosen a career that demanded everything and promised nothing but the opportunity to serve. It wasn't about recognition, wasn't about respect or admiration or even the satisfaction of a job well done. It was about the Marine in that bar, about the platoon she'd protected in Helmand, about all the warriors on the ground who needed someone overhead willing to put bombs on target regardless of danger or difficulty. That was the covenant, unspoken but understood. We'll cover you, always, no matter what. Inside the townhouse, Iris dropped her keys on the kitchen counter and poured a glass of water. The place was furnished in military minimalism, functional furniture, bare walls except for a framed print of an FA-18 in flight, a bookshelf holding technical manuals, and a handful of novels she'd never finished. Home was a relative concept when you deployed every 18 months. This was just where she slept between obligations. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a group text from her squadron's department heads. The operations officer, Lieutenant Commander Holloway, had sent a meme about Air Force pilots that would definitely violate professional communication standards if anyone from higher command saw it. The maintenance officer, a Mustang lieutenant named Park who'd been enlisted for 10 years before earning his commission, replied with a gif of someone rolling their eyes. The weapons officer, Lieutenant Thornton, sent back a string of laughing emojis. Iris smiled and added her own response. "Children, all of you." Holloway replied immediately. "Says the skipper who once pranked the CAG by filling his cockpit with ping-pong balls." She'd forgotten about that. It was years ago, back when she was a department head herself, before she'd been selected for command. The Carrier Air Group commander had been giving her squadron grief about maintenance readiness rates, implying they weren't taking their responsibilities seriously. Iris and her fellow pilots had proven their dedication by achieving a 98% readiness rate for 3 months straight, then celebrated by filling his aircraft with 3,000 ping-pong balls that had spilled out like foam when he opened the canopy. He'd laughed, eventually, after threatening non-judicial punishment and extra duty for everyone involved. The memory felt distant now, separated from present reality by the weight of command responsibility. As a skipper, she couldn't participate in pranks anymore. Couldn't be one of the gang. The position demanded distance, authority, the ability to make hard decisions about people she cared about. It was lonely in ways she hadn't anticipated when she'd accepted the assignment. Her phone buzzed a third time, not the group text now but a private message from Ramirez. "You good, skipper. Saw you slip out earlier." She appreciated his attention. Good XOs watched their commanding officers, made sure they weren't burning out or isolating themselves. She typed, "I'm fine, just needed some air. See you at 800. His response, "Roger that, sleep well." She wouldn't, but that was normal. Command officers rarely slept well, their minds too full of responsibilities and what-ifs to settle into genuine rest. Iris changed into shorts and an old squadron t-shirt, then lay down on top of the covers. The ceiling fan rotated slowly overhead, its gentle hum a white noise that usually helped her relax. Tonight her mind wouldn't stop replaying the bar conversation, analyzing it from different angles. Had she been too harsh, too defensive? Should she have just walked away and let the Marine's comments slide off like water from aircraft skin? But that was the problem, wasn't it? Always letting things slide, always taking the high road, always proving yourself over and over to people who'd never question a man with the same qualifications. She'd spent her entire career navigating that double standard, the expectation that she'd be better than good, perfect than excellent, unshakable in the face of doubt and criticism that male peers never faced. And she was tired. Not physically, though 11 years of high-performance aviation had taken their toll. Tired in her soul, in the part of herself that still remembered being a kid who looked at the sky and dreamed of flight without knowing how much it would cost to achieve it. The path to her current position had been paved with sacrifice and determination. She'd grown up in Oregon, daughter of a high school teacher and a carpenter, neither of whom had military backgrounds. Her interest in aviation came from an air show she'd attended at 10 years old, watching F-16s perform aerobatics that defied physics and common sense. She'd stood there on the tarmac, feeling jet wash blow her hair back, and decided with the absolute certainty of childhood that this was what she wanted. Her parents supported her dream even while gently warning about its difficulty. Her guidance counselors suggested more realistic careers. Her classmates thought she was crazy. She ignored all of them and focused on grades, on getting into the Naval Academy, on proving she had what it took. The academy had been brutal. Not just academically, though the engineering curriculum nearly broke her more than once. Socially, emotionally, physically brutal. She'd been one of fewer than 200 women in a class of 1,200 midshipmen, a ratio that meant constant scrutiny and judgment. Every mistake magnified, every success attributed to standards being lowered or instructors playing favorites. She'd endured harassment that ranged from comments to physical intimidation, always reported, rarely punished significantly. But she'd survived, graduated in the top third of her class, earned her commission, gone to flight school in Pensacola where the real crucible began. Naval aviation training was designed to break people. It tested your physical limits, your mental endurance, your ability to make life-or-death decisions while exhausted and overwhelmed. The washout rate was over 50%. Iris had watched classmates quit or fail, good people with the right motivations who simply couldn't handle the demands. She'd come close herself during carrier qualification, the phase where student pilots learned to land on moving flight decks at night. It was one of the most dangerous things aviators did, combining precision flying with the knowledge that mistakes meant death. She'd bolted on her first 3 attempts, missing the arresting wires and having to go around for another pass. On the 4th attempt, in darkness with a pitching deck and crosswinds, she caught the 3-wire and felt the violent deceleration that meant success. She'd sat in the cockpit afterward, hands shaking, adrenaline making her vision pulse. The landing signal officer's voice came through her headset. "Good pass, Lieutenant. Welcome to the club." That was 6 years ago. Since then she'd accumulated hundreds of carrier landings, each one still terrifying, still demanding absolute focus. She'd deployed to the Persian Gulf, to the South China Sea, to the Mediterranean. She'd flown combat missions over Syria and Iraq, providing close air support to ground forces fighting ISIS. She'd hunted enemy radar installations, struck weapon caches, enforced no-fly zones. She'd done all of this while writing reports, attending meetings, managing junior officers, and dealing with the 1,000 administrative tasks that military life demanded. Somewhere in that timeline she'd been selected for department head, then squadron executive officer, and finally commanding officer. Each promotion had been hard-fought, earned through exceptional performance and the luck of timing. The Navy was getting better about opportunities for women in aviation, but the numbers still lagged. Female fighter pilots made up less than 5% of the tactical aviation community. Female squadron commanders were even rarer. Iris was one of maybe a dozen in the entire Navy. That distinction should have felt like achievement. Instead, it mostly felt like pressure, like she was representing not just herself but every woman who'd come before and would come after. If she succeeded, it opened doors. If she failed, it confirmed biases. The weight of that was crushing sometimes. Her phone's alarm would go off in 6 hours. She needed sleep. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and thought about the Marine's question. "Do you know who I am?" She turned it into a teaching moment, a chance to educate about service and sacrifice. But the real answer was more complicated. Did she know who she was? Beyond the rank and qualifications, beyond the medals and flight hours, who was Iris Kale? Was she the kid from Oregon who dreamed of flying? The Academy midshipman who endured harassment to earn her place? The Nugget pilot terrified of carrier landings? The combat veteran who'd put bombs on target? The commanding officer responsible for 80 lives and millions in equipment? All of those, probably. None of them, maybe. Identity was fluid when you lived in extremes, when your job required you to be simultaneously confident and humble, aggressive and cautious, a leader and a follower. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. She drifted into light sleep, the kind where you're aware of time passing but not fully conscious. Dreams came and went, fragments of memories mixed with anxiety about tomorrow's briefing. At some point she woke completely, checked her phone, saw it was 4:30, and decided to give up on sleep entirely. She ran 5 miles on base roads still dark with pre-dawn shadow. Showered. Put on her flight suit, the green Nomex material worn soft from hundreds of wearings. Checked her patches. Squadron insignia on the left shoulder showing a roaring lion, name tape on the right breast, aviator wings above it. In the mirror she looked like what she was, a naval officer on a Wednesday morning getting ready for work. Except her work involved $50 million aircraft and weapons capable of leveling buildings. Breakfast was coffee and a protein bar eaten standing in her kitchen. She checked email on her phone, scanning through the usual administrative garbage. A message from the squadron's supply officer about parts requisitions. A reminder about sexual assault prevention training. A note from her own boss, the Carrier Air Group commander, asking for an update on readiness metrics. She'd deal with all of it after the 800 brief. The drive to the squadron spaces took 10 minutes through base roads now filling with morning traffic. Sailors and Marines heading to their respective duties, the military day beginning with the punctuality that civilian life rarely matched. She parked in her assigned spot, a privilege of rank that came with the burden of always being identified. Inside the building, her squadron's administrative spaces were already active. Senior Chief Martinez, the Command Master Chief and the highest-ranking enlisted member of the squadron, was at his desk with a cup of coffee large enough to be a war crime. He looked up when she entered and stood, a gesture of respect she'd long since stopped trying to prevent. "Morning, Skipper," he said. His voice had the gravelly quality of 20 years shouting over flight deck noise. "Morning, Senior Chief." "How are we looking today?" Martinez glanced at his computer screen. 2 birds down for scheduled maintenance, one with an avionics issue we're troubleshooting, otherwise solid. Maintenance brief is at 7:30 if you want to sit in. She nodded. "I'll be there. Any personnel issues I need to know about." His expression shifted slightly, the microscopic change that meant yes but not urgent. "Lieutenant Cortez's wife went into labor last night. He's at the hospital. Should be back tomorrow unless there are complications." Cortez was one of her junior pilots, competent but still learning the countless details that separated adequate from excellent. "Send him my congratulations and tell him to take the time he needs. Family first." Martinez smiled slightly. "Will do, Skipper." The maintenance brief was standard, department heads reviewing aircraft status and upcoming inspections. Iris listened and asked pointed questions that kept everyone sharp. At 7:55 she walked to the conference room for the admin brief, a weekly meeting where the squadron's leadership discussed everything except flying. Ramirez was already there with a coffee cup and a tablet displaying the agenda. He looked up and nodded. "Skipper." She took her seat at the head of the table. "XO. What's the damage today?" He smiled without humor. "2 evals need your signature, 3 leave requests need approval, and we have a DUI incident to discuss." She sighed. DUIs were the bane of every commanding officer's existence, stupid mistakes with consequences that rippled through careers and readiness. "Who?" Ramirez pulled up the report. "Petty Officer Daniels, Aviation Electronics Technician, 2nd class. Got pulled over Saturday night at 200 with a .13 BAC. Local police, so it's all documented. He's been with us 8 months." Iris felt the familiar weight settle on her shoulders. Daniels was young, mid-20s probably, a kid who'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. Now she had to decide his fate. The Navy had zero tolerance for DUIs. She could process him for administrative separation, ending his career, or she could recommend non-judicial punishment and mandatory counseling, giving him a second chance while documenting the incident. "Has he had prior issues?" she asked. Ramirez shook his head. "Clean record, good evaluations. His chief says he's reliable and technically skilled. This appears to be a one-time lapse." Iris drummed her fingers on the table, thinking. The easy call was separation. It eliminated a problem and sent a message to the squadron about standards. But it also destroyed a young sailor's future for a mistake that hurt nobody but himself. The harder call was redemption. Giving Daniels a chance to learn and improve, showing the squadron that mistakes could be survived with accountability and growth. It was riskier for her, though. If Daniels screwed up again, it would reflect on her judgment. She made her decision. "I want to see him personally before I decide. Have his chain of command bring him to my office this afternoon. I'll talk to him, assess where his head is, then determine appropriate action." Ramirez nodded and made a note. "Understood, Skipper." The brief continued through various administrative topics. Leave requests were straightforward. She approved all 3. The evaluations required more attention, careful reading to ensure accuracy and fairness. She made notes, asked clarifying questions, signed where appropriate. By 9:30 it was done. She had 30 minutes before a conference call with the Carrier Strike Group staff about the upcoming training exercise. She used the time to review tactical publications, studying recent intelligence summaries about potential adversary capabilities. Russia and China were both developing weapons systems designed to counter American naval aviation. Her job was to understand those threats and develop tactics to overcome them. It was chess at supersonic speeds, each side trying to anticipate the other's moves. The conference call was typical military coordination, multiple commands trying to synchronize operations while dealing with conflicting priorities. Iris contributed when relevant and stayed silent otherwise, a skill she'd learned early in her career. Say something meaningful or say nothing at all. Posturing wasted everyone's time. Lunch was a sandwich from the base galley eaten at her desk while reviewing training schedules. At 1400, Senior Chief Martinez knocked on her door. "Skipper, Petty Officer Daniels is here." She straightened in her chair. "Send him in." The sailor who entered her office looked exactly like she'd expected. Young, scared, standing at rigid attention in his service uniform. His face was pale and his eyes forward, focusing on some point above her head. "Petty Officer 2nd Class Daniels reporting as ordered, ma'am," he said. His voice was steady despite obvious nerves. Iris gestured to a chair. "Have a seat, Daniels." He sat carefully, back straight, hands on his knees. She could see him fighting not to fidget. She let the silence stretch for a moment, then said, "You know why you're here?" "Yes, ma'am, the DUI." "Talk to me about it. What happened?" He swallowed. "I made a terrible decision, ma'am. I went out with friends Saturday night. I drank too much. I knew I was impaired, but I drove anyway. There's no excuse. I take full responsibility." Iris watched him carefully, reading body language and tone. He wasn't making excuses or blaming circumstances. That was a good sign. "Why did you drive? You knew it was wrong." Daniel's composure cracked slightly. "Honestly, ma'am, I wasn't thinking. Or I was thinking stupid thoughts. I felt fine, which I know doesn't mean anything. The legal limit doesn't care how you feel." I risked my life and other people's lives because I was too proud or too dumb to call a cab. It was inexcusable. His voice carried genuine remorse. That mattered. Iris had dealt with enough discipline cases to distinguish between sailors who regretted getting caught versus those who regretted their actions. She leaned forward. You understand the Navy's position on DUIs. We could separate you administratively, end your career over this. Why shouldn't I do exactly that? Daniels met her eyes for the first time. Because I can do better, ma'am. I know that sounds like empty words from someone who just proved he makes terrible decisions, but I love this job. I love working on aircraft. I love being part of something bigger than myself. I love serving. This mistake doesn't define who I am, but I understand if you decide it has to define my future. If it does, I'll accept that consequence and learn from it. But if you give me a chance to stay, I promise you won't regret it. I'll work harder than anyone. I'll be an example of accountability and improvement. I'll make this squadron better by being better. The speech was earnest but not rehearsed. Iris recognized authenticity when she heard it. She sat back and considered. Finally, she said, here's what's going to happen. I'm recommending non-judicial punishment under Article 15 of the UCMJ. You'll lose rank and pay. You'll be restricted to base for 60 days. You'll attend mandatory alcohol counseling. You'll have a documented black mark on your record that will follow you for the rest of your career. Daniel's expression showed relief and resignation in equal measure. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. Iris held up a hand. I'm not finished. This is your only chance. If you so much as sneeze wrong in the next year, if you give me any reason to question this decision, I will personally ensure you're separated from the Navy faster than you can pack your sea bag. You will be a model sailor from this moment forward. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, completely. She nodded. Good. Senior Chief Martinez will coordinate your punishment and counseling schedule. You're dismissed. Daniel stood, came to attention, and executed a parade ground-perfect salute. Thank you, ma'am. After he left, Iris sat alone in her office for several minutes. Command meant making decisions like this, balancing justice with mercy, punishment with redemption. She'd never know for certain if she'd made the right call. All she could do was trust her judgment and hope it proved sound. The rest of the day passed in typical fashion. More meetings, more emails, more of the endless administrative machinery that kept a squadron functioning. At 1700, she walked out to the flight line, wanting to see her aircraft, needing the reminder of why all the administrative drudgery mattered. The FA-18 Super Hornets sat in neat rows on the tarmac, their gray paint schemes designed for low visibility. Each one represented the culmination of billions in research and engineering. Each one was a weapon system capable of projecting American power anywhere in the world. But to Iris, they were more than weapons. They were tools of her craft, instruments she'd learned to play with virtuoso skill. She approached her assigned aircraft, the one stenciled with her name below the canopy rail. The maintainers had already done their evening turnaround, prepping the jet for tomorrow's training flight. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling sun-warmed metal under her palm. This aircraft had carried her through combat, through carrier landings, through storms and emergencies and the 1,000 close calls that defined military aviation. It had never let her down. She wouldn't let it down either. That was the unspoken bargain between pilot and machine. Take care of me and I'll take care of you. As the sun dipped toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Iris Kale stood alone on the flight line and let herself simply exist in the moment. Not thinking about command responsibilities, not worrying about tomorrow's challenges, just being a pilot next to her aircraft, connected to a tradition of naval aviation that stretched back over a century. The call sign they'd given her in flight school was Ember. It had started as mockery, a reference to her red hair and supposedly fiery temper. But she'd embraced it, made it her own, turned it into something that represented her completely. An ember was small, easily overlooked, often underestimated. But embers held the potential for fire. Given the right conditions, given oxygen and fuel, an ember could grow into something that consumed everything in its path. She'd spent her career proving that truth, showing doubters that small and overlooked didn't mean weak or incapable. She'd become the fire they hadn't seen coming, and she'd left scorched earth in her wake, not from destruction but from the sheer heat of her dedication and skill. Tomorrow she'd brief her pilots, fly a training mission, come back and do it all again. The cycle was endless but not meaningless. Each repetition built capability. Each training mission prepared them for real combat. Each day spent in peace was a day invested in being ready for war. That was the warrior's burden and the warrior's purpose. Iris understood both intimately. As darkness settled over Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, she walked back to her truck. Her phone showed messages from her pilots, casual conversations in their group chat. Lieutenant Vaughn had sent a meme about landing signal officers that was actually funny. Lieutenant Commander Holloway had responded with a story about a rough landing he'd made earlier in the week. They were bonding, building the camaraderie that made squadrons effective. She added her own comment, keeping it light, maintaining the careful balance between authority and accessibility that defined good leadership. The drive back to her temporary housing took her past illuminated athletic fields where Marines ran conditioning drills under floodlights, past simulator buildings where pilots practiced emergencies in controlled environments, past hangars where maintainers worked through the night keeping aircraft flyable. The military never slept. It pulsed with constant activity, a machine that ran on dedication and coffee in equal measure. At her townhouse she changed into running clothes and did another 5 miles, this time under stars that wheeled overhead in patterns navigators had used for millennia. The physical exertion cleared her mind, burned away the day's accumulated stress. When she finished, she felt centered again, ready for whatever came next. She showered and made dinner, a simple pasta with vegetables, ate standing at her counter while reading news on her phone. The world was complicated, threats emerging from multiple directions, old adversaries growing bolder, new challenges arising from technology and ideology. America's military remained the most capable fighting force ever assembled, but capability required constant maintenance. You couldn't rest on past victories. You had to train, adapt, improve, or you'd wake up one day and find yourself outmatched by enemies who'd worked harder. That night she slept better, exhaustion finally overwhelming the restless energy that usually kept her alert. When her alarm sounded at 500, she woke feeling refreshed, ready for the brief at 800, ready for the training flight after that, ready for whatever challenges the day brought. This was her life. This was her purpose. She was Lieutenant Commander Iris Kale, commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 217, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The bar incident felt like a distant memory already, a momentary intersection of her military life with the civilian world. But the Marine's question lingered. Do you know who I am? She knew now. Knew herself better for having articulated her journey to a stranger. Knew that her worth wasn't defined by other people's recognition, but by her own commitment to standards and service. Knew that every time someone shoved her, literally or figuratively, she had a choice. She could fight back, educate, demand respect. Or she could walk away and let her work speak for itself. Usually she chose the latter. Sometimes, like at the bar, she chose the former. Both were valid. Both served their purpose. What mattered was maintaining her integrity regardless of external pressure. As she drove to work that morning, Virginia's sun rising over the Atlantic, she felt a rare moment of satisfaction. Not happiness exactly, not contentment, but the solid feeling of being aligned with her purpose. She was doing what she was meant to do, making the sacrifices required to serve, leading sailors and officers who deserved her best effort, flying aircraft that defended American interests and protected American lives. It wasn't a perfect life. It wasn't even an easy life. But it was hers, earned through determination and skill, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. The day unfolded with familiar rhythms. Morning brief, maintenance coordination, pre-flight inspection, walking out to her aircraft with her flight gear bag slung over her shoulder, the ritual of suiting up, checking connections, settling into the cockpit, the feeling of the jet coming alive under her hands as systems powered up. Lieutenant Vaughn was her wingman today, a solid pilot who followed directions and didn't showboat. They'd be practicing close air support scenarios with a Marine Raider unit, coordinating simulated strikes against ground targets. It was the same kind of mission she'd flown in Helmand, the same coordination that had saved the Marine's life at the bar. She ran through her checklist with practiced efficiency, muscle memory, guiding her hands to switches and buttons without conscious thought. The tower cleared them for taxi. She advanced the throttles and felt the Super Hornet roll forward, 30 tons of aircraft responding to gentle inputs. They lined up on the runway, Vaughn in parade formation off her right wing. Clearance came through, throttles to military power, then into afterburner. The acceleration pressed her back into her seat as the aircraft gathered speed. At rotation speed, she pulled back on the stick and felt the nose rise, landing gear coming up, the ground dropping away. The transition from earthbound to airborne, which never got old no matter how many times she experienced it. They climbed into morning sky, banking toward the training area. Below them, Virginia's coast was a patchwork of green forest and blue water, civilization held at bay by military reservations. Ahead was the mission, the coordination with ground forces, the practice of skills they hoped never to need in real combat but trained for relentlessly anyway. Iris settled into the mindset she'd cultivated over 11 years of flying, alert but relaxed, focused but adaptable, ready for anything. The radio crackled with air traffic control frequencies, other aircraft calling positions, towers clearing takeoffs and landings. The sky was busy today, multiple training operations sharing compressed airspace. She monitored it all while maintaining formation, dividing attention between instruments and outside references. Vaughn's voice came through. Ember, Widow 2-3, with you at Angels 15. Angels 15 meant 15,000 feet. Military communications were precise, no wasted words, everything standardized so anyone could understand regardless of accent or background. She replied, Widow 2-3, Ember. Roger, proceed to coordinates and establish contact with ground controller. They flew south toward the training range, following a route programmed into their navigation systems. The morning sun had burned off coastal fog, leaving visibility unlimited. Perfect flying weather. The kind of conditions that made you remember why you loved this job despite all its difficulties and dangers. The ground controller's voice came through, a Marine captain whose call sign was Hammer. Ember, Hammer 6. We have simulated enemy positions at coordinates I'm pushing now. Request close air support, danger close, enemy within 100 meters of friendly positions. This was the scenario they'd briefed. Marines pinned down by enemy fire, needing airstrikes so close to their positions that any mistake would cause fratricide. It was the most demanding close air support work, requiring absolute precision and trust between ground and air. Iris acknowledged and studied the coordinates displayed on her tactical screen. The target area was a compound in the training range, buildings marked as enemy positions. The simulated friendly forces were in a tree line barely 100 meters away. She ran mental calculations, considering attack angles, weapon release parameters, blast effects. Then she called her wingman. Widow 2-3, Ember, we're going hot. I'll take the northern structure, you take the southern. Coordinated strike, 15-second interval. Copy. Vaughn's response was immediate. Copy all, Ember. They began their attack run, diving from altitude toward the target area. G-forces pulled at Iris's body as she maneuvered, the aircraft responding with fighter jet agility despite its weight. Her HUD displayed targeting information, steering cues guiding her toward the release point. At the right moment, she pressed the pickle button and felt the training weapon release, a small practice bomb that would register on the range's scoring system. She pulled up hard, banking away, feeling the airframe groan under G-load. Vaughn's weapon released 15 seconds later, his call confirming. Widow 2-3 off hot. They climbed back to altitude and circled while the ground controller assessed the simulated results. His voice came back satisfied. Ember, Hammer 6, good hits, enemy positions neutralized, friendlies are secure, excellent work. Iris allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. This was what she trained for, what she'd done in real combat, what justified every difficult moment of her career. When it worked, when the coordination was perfect and the execution was flawless, there was no better feeling. They ran the scenario again with different parameters. Then a third time with Vaughn as lead, Iris providing oversight and feedback. By the time they returned to base 2 hours had passed, their training allocation exhausted. The landing was routine, both aircraft touching down smoothly and taxiing to their parking spots. Iris shut down systems and climbed out of the cockpit, her flight suit damp with sweat despite the cockpit's environmental controls. The debrief took another hour, reviewing every decision and action, identifying what worked and what could improve. This constant evaluation was how they stayed sharp, how good pilots became great ones. Lieutenant Vaughn accepted feedback well, asking questions, taking notes. He'd be an excellent aviator with more experience. Iris made a mental note to give him more challenging assignments to push his development. That was part of her responsibility as commanding officer, cultivating the next generation of naval aviators. After the debrief, she returned to her office, answering emails, signing documents, dealing with the administrative machinery again. At 1700, she called it a day, driving back to her townhouse with the satisfaction of work well done. That night her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, assuming it was spam, but military instincts made her cautious. She picked up. Commander Cale. The voice on the other end was familiar, the Marine from the bar. "Ma'am, this is Corporal Davis, from the other night. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from public directory." Iris frowned slightly but kept her tone neutral. "Corporal, what can I do for you?" He sounded nervous. "Ma'am, I wanted to follow up on something. The Marine who shoved you, Lance Corporal Briggs, he's been talking about what happened, about meeting you, about what you said. It's spreading through the unit. A lot of guys are asking questions, wanting to know more about close air support operations, about how coordination works. I was wondering if you might be willing to give a brief to our company. Talk about aviation support from the pilot's perspective. Help us understand what you all go through so we can work together better." Iris sat down on her couch, processing the request. It was unusual but not unprecedented. Inter-service education was valuable. Understanding how different specialties operated improved coordination during actual operations. And it would be good for her pilots too, hearing ground perspective. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "Send me a formal request through channels, your company commander to my chain of command. If it gets approved, I'd be happy to brief your Marines." Davis's relief was audible. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll get that started tomorrow." After they hung up, Iris sat in her quiet townhouse and smiled. The bar incident had triggered something unexpected. Not just a lesson learned, but a genuine opportunity for improved inter-service cooperation. From a shove and an argument had come the seed of better understanding. Maybe that was how progress happened. Not through grand gestures, but through small moments of connection, individual interactions that accumulated into cultural change. She thought about the Marine in Sangin, the one whose platoon she'd protected with danger-close strikes. She'd never met him, didn't know his name, but their lives had intersected at a critical moment, her actions from the sky enabling his survival on the ground. Now years later, another intersection, another chance to bridge the gap between aviation and ground forces. It felt like continuity, like her career forming a coherent narrative instead of just a series of disconnected events. The next morning she mentioned Davis's request to Ramirez during their daily coordination meeting. He nodded thoughtfully. "That could be good for the squadron. Get our pilots out of the air-wing bubble. Let them hear from the grunts who depend on us." "My thought exactly," Iris agreed. "If it gets approved, I'll make it a squadron event. We'll all brief them together. Make it a real exchange of information." The formal request came through channels within a week. The Marine Company commander, a captain named Foster, endorsed it enthusiastically. Iris's boss, the Carrier Air Group commander, approved it with a note saying it was exactly the kind of inter-service coordination he wanted to see more of. They scheduled it for the following Thursday, a 2-hour session at the Marine Training Facility. Iris briefed her pilots on the plan. They'd discuss close air support procedures, coordination protocols, the capabilities and limitations of their aircraft and weapons. They'd show videos of actual missions. They'd answer questions. The goal was demystification, helping Marines understand that pilots weren't detached observers but integral parts of ground combat. Thursday arrived. Iris loaded her squadron's pilots into 2 vans and drove to the Marine facility, a sprawling complex of training buildings and administrative spaces. Captain Foster met them at the entrance, a squared-away officer whose handshake was firm and whose eyes assessed them with professional curiosity. "Commander Cale," he said, "thank you for doing this." "Our pleasure, Captain. Your Marines saved our lives plenty of times in combat. Least we can do is help you understand how we operate." Foster led them to an auditorium where 100 Marines sat in rows, their attention immediate and focused. These were warriors, many with combat deployments, all of them professional in bearing and demeanor. Iris felt their assessment, the same evaluation she'd experienced countless times. Female officer, naval aviator, here to lecture them about combat. She could read the skepticism in some faces, the openness in others, the curiosity in most. She walked to the front and stood center stage, her flight suit and patches identifying her immediately as a pilot. No preamble, no introduction. She dove straight in. "How many of you have called in close air support during deployment?" About 30 hands went up. "How many of you know what the pilot sees when you give them coordinates?" Most of the hands went down. A few stayed up, Marines who'd probably gone through Joint Terminal Attack Controller training. "That's what we're here to talk about today. The view from the cockpit. What we're capable of. What we're not capable of. How to communicate with us effectively. How to keep yourselves safe while we drop bombs on people trying to kill you." She clicked to her first slide, a photo taken from an FA-18 cockpit during a close air support mission. The ground was visible below, a compound surrounded by agricultural fields. The image showed exactly what the pilot saw, a HUD full of information, targeting cues, altitude, and airspeed indicators. "This is my view when you call me for support. I'm moving at 400 knots. I'm at 10,000 feet. You give me coordinates and I have to find the target, verify it against intelligence, confirm there are no friendlies in the blast radius, calculate my attack parameters, execute the run, release the weapon, and get clear. I have maybe 60 seconds to do all of that. If I screw up, if I drop even 50 meters off target, I kill you instead of the enemy." The auditorium was completely silent. She had their attention. For the next 90 minutes, she walked them through close air support operations from the pilot's perspective. She showed videos of actual strikes, explained the decision-making process, discussed the challenges of coordinating between ground and air. Her pilots added their own experiences, creating a comprehensive picture of naval aviation support. The Marines asked excellent questions, technical details about weapons effects, coordination procedures for different scenarios, limitations of aircraft sensors in poor weather. Each question got a detailed answer, no condescension, no dismissal. This was professional military education at its finest. When they finished, Captain Foster stood and addressed his Marines. "Gentlemen, what you've just heard is the most detailed briefing on close air support I've ever seen. Commander Cale and her pilots have given us insight into capabilities and limitations we need to understand. This knowledge will save lives. I expect every one of you to internalize it and apply it during future operations." The Marines stood and applauded. Not polite recognition but genuine appreciation, the response of warriors who'd gained valuable knowledge. Iris felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with personal recognition. This was why she served. To be part of the larger machine, to contribute her expertise to a collective mission, to make other warriors more effective. Afterward, Marines approached individually to ask follow-up questions or share their own close air support experiences. Corporal Davis was among them, grinning. "Ma'am, that was outstanding, exactly what we needed." Lance Corporal Briggs, the Marine who'd shoved her in the bar, stood nearby looking uncomfortable. Finally, he approached. "Commander, I owe you an apology, a real one." Iris looked at him evenly. "You already apologized at the bar." "I know, ma'am, but I didn't understand what I was apologizing for. Not really. Now I do. You and your pilots put yourselves at risk every time you fly support for us. You're not tourists. You're warriors doing a different job. I was ignorant and disrespectful. I'm sorry." She extended her hand. He shook it, his grip respectful rather than challenging. "Apology accepted, Lance Corporal. Now go forth and be smarter than you were a week ago." He grinned. "Yes, ma'am, absolutely." The drive back to Oceana felt different. Her pilots were energized, talking about the Marines' questions, discussing how they'd incorporate that feedback into their own training. Lieutenant Vaughn said, "Skipper, that was one of the best briefs I've seen. Really bridged the gap." Iris nodded. "That's the goal. We're all on the same team. The better we understand each other, the more effective we are." That night she received an email from Captain Foster, thanking her formally and requesting they make the exchange a regular event, maybe quarterly. He also mentioned that word was spreading through the Marine Command about the brief. Other units were asking for similar sessions. Iris forwarded the email to her boss with a recommendation to expand the program. This was the kind of initiative that built inter-service cooperation and improved overall readiness. The CAG responded enthusiastically, authorizing her to develop a formal training curriculum that could be used across the fleet. Suddenly, she had a new project on top of her normal duties. She recruited her operations officer, Holloway, to help develop the training package. They spent evenings crafting presentations, gathering videos, writing supporting materials. It was extra work but meaningful work, the kind that justified the time investment. Over the following months, the program grew. They briefed Marine units, Army Special Forces, Air Force JTACs. Each session refined their approach, improved their materials, generated new insights. Feedback was universally positive. Warriors appreciated the transparency and detail, the willingness to discuss not just capabilities but limitations. Iris's reputation spread beyond her squadron. She became known as an officer who bridged communities, who took inter-service cooperation seriously, who invested time in education and understanding. It wasn't formal recognition, no medals or awards, but it was something more valuable, respect from people who mattered. Her operational tempo remained intense. The squadron deployed to the Mediterranean aboard USS Theodore Roosevelt for 6 months, conducting operations over Syria and providing contingency support for NATO allies. Iris flew combat missions, dropping precision-guided weapons on ISIS targets, enforcing no-fly zones, demonstrating American capability to potential adversaries. She led her squadron through the deployment's challenges, mechanical issues, personnel problems, the constant pressure of maintaining readiness while operating from a ship. They performed excellently, earning accolades from the strike group commander. When they returned stateside, Iris had been commanding officer for 18 months. The Navy's standard tour length for squadron command was 2 years. She was entering the final stretch, knowing her time in this position was limited. The knowledge brought mixed emotions. She loved commanding the Red Lions, loved flying with her pilots, loved the daily challenges of leadership. But command was also exhausting, a continuous drain on energy and emotion. Part of her looked forward to whatever came next. Part of her dreaded leaving this role that had defined her for the past year and a half. Her boss called her into his office one afternoon. The CAG, Captain Reeves, was a former Super Hornet pilot himself, a veteran of multiple combat deployments. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Iris. We need to talk about your future." She sat curious. Reeves leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment. "You've done an outstanding job with VFA 217. Readiness numbers are excellent. Your pilots respect you. You've handled discipline issues fairly. You've developed that inter-service training program that's getting attention all the way up to the 3-star level. You're exactly the kind of officer the Navy needs in senior positions." She waited, knowing there was more. Reeves continued. "Your command tour ends in 6 months. After that, you'll rotate to staff position while we figure out your next assignment. The question is what that assignment should be. You're on track for O5, probably within 2 years. The question is where you screen for lieutenant commander and what jobs you take to position yourself for eventual command at the O5 level. Do you want command of a bigger squadron? Staff work at OPNAV. A teaching position at Top Gun or test pilot school? Iris considered the options. Each path had advantages and drawbacks. Bigger squadron command meant more responsibility but also more administrative burden. Staff work at OPNAV in the Pentagon meant influence over policy but also desk work in Washington. Teaching meant developing the next generation but stepping away from operational flying. Finally, she said, "Sir, I'd like to stay operational as long as possible. Teaching would be fine if the Navy needs me there, but my preference is cockpit time, flying, leading from the front." Reeves smiled. "That's what I figured you'd say. Here's my recommendation. After your staff tour, we get you screened for O5. Then you take a department head instructor position at Meridian for a year, teach the nuggets, pad your training, resume. After that, you compete for command of an FA-18 squadron. You do well, which you will, and suddenly you're positioned for CAG later in your career." It was a solid plan, a trajectory that balanced operational experience with the staff work necessary for senior rank. Iris nodded slowly. "That sounds good, sir. I appreciate you thinking ahead." Reeves's expression turned serious. "Iris, you're one of the best naval aviators I've worked with. Male or female doesn't matter. You're simply excellent at what you do. The Navy needs to retain officers like you. So if there's anything making you consider getting out, anything we can address or fix, I need to know." She appreciated his directness. Retention was a constant challenge, especially for pilots who could make triple their salary flying for airlines, but money wasn't what motivated her. "Sir, I'm not planning to get out. This is my career. This is what I do." He looked relieved. "Good, because you're going places, Commander. The Navy's changing. Slowly, sometimes grudgingly, but changing. In 10 years, we'll have more female aviators, more diversity in leadership. You're helping pave that path whether you intend to or not. The officers coming behind you will have an easier time because you're proving it's possible." It was the most direct acknowledgement she'd received of her role as a trailblazer. She'd never sought that position, never wanted to be a symbol or representative. She just wanted to fly and serve. But Reeves was right. Her presence, her success, did matter beyond her personal achievement. She was creating space for others by proving competence and demanding respect. The rest of her command tour passed quickly. Months blurred together in routine punctuated by occasional moments of significance. Training exercises, deployments, personnel changes, the endless administrative work that consumed commanding officers. She handled a sexual harassment complaint between 2 junior sailors, investigating thoroughly and taking appropriate action. She wrote fitness reports that would determine her sailors' future promotions. She attended change of command ceremonies for fellow squadron commanders. She flew whenever possible, maintaining her proficiency, staying connected to the skill that defined her identity. As her final day as commanding officer approached, her squadron began planning the traditional change of command ceremony. The event where she would formally transfer authority to her relief, Commander Sarah Voss, a capable officer she'd worked with during her department head days. The ceremony would follow Navy protocol, formal speeches, the symbolic passing of command, her final walk past her assembled squadron. It felt surreal, this approaching end to a chapter that had consumed her life for 2 years. The night before the ceremony, her pilots threw her an unofficial celebration at a bar off base. Not the same bar where she'd met the Marine, but similar. Loud music, cheap beer, warriors decompressing. They presented her with a plaque featuring a photo of her aircraft and signatures from every pilot in the squadron. Lieutenant Vaughn, now more experienced and confident, gave a speech thanking her for her leadership and mentorship. She felt emotions threaten to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure but pushed them down. "Save it for tomorrow," she told herself. "Tonight, just enjoy being with your people." The actual change of command ceremony occurred on a perfect Virginia morning, clear skies and gentle breeze. Her squadron assembled in dress uniforms on the flight line, aircraft parked in precise rows behind them. The Carrier Air Group commander presided, along with various senior officers and guests. Iris stood at attention in her service dress white uniform, medals and ribbons displayed, gold aviator wings catching sunlight. Commander Voss stood beside her, about to inherit the responsibility Iris had carried for 2 years. The CAG spoke first, reading orders and delivering remarks about Iris's performance. Then Iris took the podium for her final speech as commanding officer. She looked out at her squadron, the sailors and officers she'd led through challenges and triumphs. She saw faces she knew intimately, personalities she'd managed, careers she'd shaped. Emotion threatened again, but she controlled it, keeping her voice steady. 2 years ago, I stood here and accepted command of Strike Fighter Squadron 217 with a mixture of pride and terror. The responsibility of leading 80 personnel and operating million-dollar aircraft was both an honor and a burden. Today, I stand here with those same emotions, but also with gratitude. Gratitude for every sailor who maintained our aircraft with professionalism and skill. Gratitude for every officer who led their divisions and departments with competence. Gratitude for a squadron that embraced high standards and achieved excellent results. The Red Lions are the finest fighter squadron in the Navy, not because of me but because of you. Your dedication, your expertise, your commitment to excellence. I was privileged to lead you. I'm confident you'll give Commander Voss the same support you gave me. Serve her well. Serve the Navy well. Keep flying, keep fighting, keep being the example other squadrons aspire to match. She stepped back and rendered a salute. The squadron returned it in unison, a moment of profound respect and connection. Then the ceremony concluded with the traditional passing of command, Iris handing a symbolic binder to Voss while reading the official orders. It was done. She was no longer a commanding officer. The reception afterward was bittersweet. People congratulated her, thanked her, wished her well. She smiled and responded appropriately while feeling a hollow space opening inside her. Command had been all-consuming. Now it was over, and she faced the disorienting prospect of defining herself by something else. Her next assignment was to Carrier Strike Group staff as an operations planner, a desk job that would keep her involved in aviation operations but removed from the cockpit. She reported to the staff building at Naval Station Norfolk 2 weeks later, wearing service khakis instead of a flight suit, carrying a briefcase instead of flight gear. The adjustment was jarring. Instead of flying, she attended meetings. Instead of leading sailors, she coordinated between multiple commands. Instead of making decisions, she drafted recommendations for flag officers who made the actual decisions. It was important work but different, less immediate, less visceral. She missed her squadron. Missed the daily rhythm of flight operations. Missed the tangible satisfaction of launching and recovering, of putting bombs on target, of leading from the cockpit. The staff job felt abstract by comparison, all PowerPoint slides and coordination matrices. But she adapted because that's what naval officers did. You went where the Navy needed you, and you performed excellently regardless of whether the job matched your preferences. She threw herself into the work, becoming the most knowledgeable operations planner on the staff, the person everyone consulted about aviation capabilities and limitations. Months passed. A year. She got promoted to commander, 05, her collar devices changing to silver oak leaves. The promotion board results were published, and she learned she'd screened #1 in her year group, the top-ranking officer being promoted. It was validation, recognition that her performance had been exceptional. But it also meant higher expectations going forward. The Navy invested heavily in officers who screened #1. They were expected to command at every opportunity, to pursue flag rank, to become the senior leadership of tomorrow. Iris wasn't sure she wanted flag rank, wasn't certain she wanted to climb that high. But for now, she'd continue on the path and see where it led. Her next assignment came through. Instructor pilot at Naval Air Station Meridian, teaching primary strike training to new aviators. It was exactly what the CAG had recommended, a chance to pass knowledge to the next generation while staying connected to flying. She reported to Meridian on a humid Mississippi morning, driving through base gates lined with static display aircraft from previous eras. The training command had a different feel from operational squadrons, more structured, more focused on standardization and safety. Her role was to teach Nugget pilots the basics of tactical aviation, weapons delivery, air combat maneuvering, navigation, formation flying. Many would go on to Super Hornets or other tactical aircraft. Some would wash out, unable to handle the demands. Her job was to prepare the ones who succeeded and identify the ones who shouldn't proceed. She discovered she enjoyed teaching. It required patience she'd had to develop, the ability to break complex tasks into learnable pieces, the skill of reading students and adapting instruction to their needs. Some students were natural aviators who needed minimal guidance. Others struggled with basic concepts and required extensive mentorship. She worked with all of them, demanding excellence while providing support. One student in particular reminded her of herself. Lieutenant Junior Grade Emma Chen was small, fierce, intensely focused, and constantly doubted by instructors who'd never quite accepted female combat pilots. Iris saw the determination in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her own career. She took Chen under her wing unofficially, providing extra guidance and mentorship. Not favoritism, Chen still had to meet the same standards as everyone else. But Iris understood the extra weight female aviators carried, the constant requirement to prove themselves, the exhaustion of navigating bias while also learning to fly tactical aircraft. After one particularly rough training flight where Chen had made several mistakes and received harsh feedback from another instructor, Iris found her in the hangar looking defeated. "Walk with me," Iris said. They walked out to the flight line, standing between rows of training aircraft. Iris waited for Chen to speak first. Finally, the younger pilot said, "Maybe I'm not cut out for this." Iris raised an eyebrow. "Because you had one bad flight. Because I keep making mistakes. Because the other instructors are watching everything I do, waiting for me to fail. Because I'm tired of proving myself over and over." Iris nodded slowly. "Let me tell you what I see. I see a pilot who's technically proficient, tactically sound, and capable of learning from mistakes. I also see a pilot who's dealing with pressure that male peers don't face. That extra pressure is real, it's unfair, and it's not going away." Chen looked at her with frustrated eyes. "So what am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to be better than good. You're supposed to be excellent, not because it's fair but because that's what it takes. Every female pilot who came before you faced the same challenge. Everyone who comes after you will face it until enough of us have proven competence that the doubt disappears. You can quit now and nobody would blame you. This career is hard enough without the extra weight. Or you can push through, earn your wings, fly combat aircraft, and become another data point proving that gender doesn't determine capability. Your choice." Chen was silent for a long moment. Then she straightened and said, "I'll push through." Iris smiled. "Good. Now let's review your training flight and figure out what went wrong so it doesn't happen again." They spent an hour going through the mission step by step, identifying decision points where Chen had hesitated or chosen poorly. By the end, Chen understood her mistakes and had a plan to correct them. She flew better after that, building confidence, earning respect even from the skeptical instructors. She graduated on time with good scores and orders to a Super Hornet squadron on the West Coast. Before she left, she found Iris in her office. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. You're the reason I didn't quit." Iris shook her head. "You're the reason you didn't quit. I just reminded you that you're capable. Don't forget that when things get hard again, because they will." Chen nodded and left. Iris watched her go and felt the satisfaction of mentorship, of passing hard-won knowledge to someone who'd use it well. This was legacy, she realized. Not medals or ranks or accomplishments that would be forgotten in a generation. Legacy was the people you influenced, the careers you helped shape, the knowledge you passed forward. The year at Meridian passed quickly. She flew almost daily, teaching and evaluating, occasionally taking solo flights just for the pure joy of being alone in sky with a powerful aircraft. Those solo flights reminded her why she'd chosen this career, stripping away all the politics and pressure and leaving just the fundamental human desire to fly. When orders came for her next assignment, she felt ready. She was selected for command of Strike Fighter Squadron 147, the Argonauts, an FA-18 squadron based at Naval Air Station Lemoore in California. Another command tour, another opportunity to lead, another chance to shape a squadron in her vision of excellence. She drove across country in her aging Ford Ranger, taking 5 days to make the journey, using the time to mentally prepare for the challenges ahead. Second command tour were often harder than first. Expectations were higher, problems more complex. The shine of novelty was gone, replaced by experienced understanding of all the difficulties. But she was ready. She'd learned from her first command tour, knew what worked and what didn't, understood herself better as a leader. The Argonauts had a reputation as a solid but unspectacular squadron. Good enough but not great. Her job was to push them higher, to demand more, to create a culture of excellence that became self-sustaining. She took command on a hot California morning, the ceremony similar to the one where she'd relinquished command of the Red Lions 2 years earlier. Same ritual, same protocol, different squadron. In her assumption of command speech, she laid out her expectations clearly. I expect professionalism. I expect competence. I expect you to hold yourselves and each other to the highest standards. The Argonauts will be the finest squadron in Lemoore not because I demand it, but because you commit to it. She delivered on those expectations by modeling them herself. She flew more than required, stayed later than necessary, held herself to standards higher than what she asked of others. Gradually, the squadron culture shifted. Sailors noticed their commanding officer's dedication and began matching it. Officers saw her tactical skill and worked to emulate it. Within 6 months, the Argonauts' readiness metrics had climbed. Within a year, they were winning competitions against other squadrons. Within 18 months, they were considered one of the best fighter squadrons in naval aviation. Iris received praise from her chain of command, but she deflected it to her people. I just provided direction. They did the work. It wasn't false modesty. She genuinely believed that leadership was about enabling others, not seeking personal glory. Her job was to create conditions for success, then get out of the way and let talented people achieve it. During this time period, several years after the bar incident, she received an email from Corporal Davis. He'd been promoted to sergeant and was now a platoon sergeant in a different unit. His email was short but meaningful. Ma'am, I wanted you to know that brief you gave us changed how we work with aviation. We practice better coordination now. We understand your challenges. It saved lives in deployment. Thank you. She wrote back, Sergeant Davis, the thanks belong to you and your Marines for being open to learning. Keep up the good work. The exchange reminded her that impact often rippled in unexpected ways. A bar argument had led to a training brief that had improved tactics that had saved lives. You couldn't predict these chains of causation, but you could try to act with integrity and hope it produced positive results. Her second command tour passed more quickly than her first, maybe because she knew what to expect, maybe because she was more comfortable in the role. When change of command approached again, she felt prepared to hand off the Argonauts to her relief with pride. They were better than when she'd found them. The ceremony occurred on schedule, formal and traditional. She gave her speech, handed over command, said goodbye to sailors she'd led and officers she'd mentored. Then she was done with command again, moving on to the next assignment. This time it was a position at U.S. Pacific Fleet Headquarters in Hawaii, working strategic operations planning. More staff work but at a higher level, dealing with theater-wide issues rather than individual ship operations. She moved to Pearl Harbor and settled into another temporary home, another office, another set of challenges. The work was fascinating in its scope. She helped plan exercises involving multiple nations, coordinated aviation operations across vast ocean expanses, analyzed potential scenarios from natural disasters to armed conflict. It was chess at the highest level, moving pieces that represented ships and aircraft and thousands of personnel. She was good at it, her operational experience providing insight that pure staff officers lacked. Flag officers sought her input on aviation questions. Her assessments were considered thoughtful and realistic. After 2 years in Hawaii, she screened for Captain '06, the rank that opened doors to major command positions. The promotion meant she'd achieved a level only 1% of officers reached, joining the senior leadership of the Navy. It also meant she was considered for positions of significant responsibility, carrier air wing command, major staff positions, eventually perhaps rear admiral. She wasn't sure she wanted admiral stars. The higher you climbed, the more your job became politics and administration rather than operational leadership. But she'd learned not to plan too far ahead. The Navy would send her where they needed her. Her next assignment was a big one. Executive Officer of Carrier Air Wing 11, the Deputy Commander of all aviation units on USS Nimitz. It was a fleet job, seagoing, operational. She'd spend most of the next 2 years at sea, deploying to the Western Pacific, operating in contested waters where Chinese and Russian forces watched American movements closely. The job was demanding and exhilarating. As Deputy Air Wing Commander, she coordinated operations between multiple squadrons, planned strikes, managed flight schedules, dealt with the thousand details that kept carrier aviation functioning. She worked for an Admiral, Rear Admiral Patterson, who commanded the strike group. He was demanding but fair, a former Tomcat pilot who understood tactical aviation intimately. They developed a strong working relationship, Iris handling most day-to-day aviation decisions while keeping him informed on major issues. One night during deployment, after a long day of flight operations in the South China Sea, Patterson called her to his cabin. She wondered if there was a problem, some issue she'd need to address. Instead, he poured 2 glasses of scotch and gestured to a chair. "Captain Kale, I wanted to talk about your future," he said. She accepted the glass but didn't drink yet. "Sir," Patterson smiled slightly. "You're wondering why an admiral is offering you scotch and asking about career plans. Fair question. Here's the answer. I'm retiring in 2 years. Before I do, I want to ensure the Navy retains and promotes its best officers. You're one of them, so I'm asking directly, do you want flag rank? Because if you do, I'll sponsor you for it. I'll recommend you for Air Wing Command, which is a required milestone. I'll write your evaluations in terms that make clear your admiral material. But if you don't want it, if you're planning to retire or transition to civilian life, tell me now so I don't waste energy positioning you for something you don't intend to pursue." Iris considered the question carefully. Flag rank meant at least another decade of service, probably more. It meant leaving operational flying completely, becoming an administrator and strategist. It meant relocating constantly, sacrificing personal life for career demands. It meant being scrutinized at the highest levels, representing not just herself but the entire institution. But it also meant influence. Flag officers shaped policy, made decisions that affected thousands of sailors, guided the Navy's future. She could impact issues she cared about: readiness, retention, the continued integration of women into all aspects of naval aviation. Was that worth the sacrifice? She looked at Patterson and said honestly, "Sir, I don't know. A year ago I'd have said no automatically, but now I'm not sure. I love operational flying, but I'm reaching the age where I can't do it much longer. Staff work has taught me I'm good at planning and coordination. Maybe I could contribute at the flag level." Patterson nodded. "That's a fair assessment. Here's my advice. Don't decide now. Finish this tour as Deputy CAG. Take Air Wing Command when it's offered. See how you like that level of responsibility. Then decide about flag rank. But know that you have my full support either way." She appreciated his honesty and his mentorship. "Thank you, sir. I'll do exactly that." They talked for another hour about Navy politics, about changes in leadership philosophy, about the challenges facing the fleet. Patterson was unusually candid, treating her as a peer rather than a subordinate. It was the kind of conversation senior officers rarely had with juniors, an acknowledgement that she'd reached a level where such discussions were appropriate. The deployment continued through spring and summer. They operated near Taiwan during a period of heightened tensions, Chinese aircraft shadowing them constantly. They conducted freedom of navigation operations in disputed waters, asserting America's commitment to international law. They trained with Japanese and Australian forces, strengthening alliances. It was demanding work but meaningful, the kind of forward presence that deterred aggression and reassured allies. Ira spent most days in the carrier's flag spaces, coordinating operations, briefing the admiral, solving problems. She spent evenings in her cabin reviewing intelligence reports and planning documents. Sleep was limited. Stress was constant. But she thrived on it, finding the operational tempo stimulating rather than exhausting. One morning, the watch officer notified her of an emergency. An FA-18 from one of the strike fighter squadrons had experienced engine failure during a routine patrol. The pilot, Lieutenant Simmons, was attempting to return to the carrier but losing altitude. Might not make it. Needed immediate support. Iris rushed to the flag bridge and assessed the situation. Simmons was 60 miles out, descending through 10,000 feet, one engine dead and the other showing warning indicators. He had minutes before he'd have to eject. The carrier was launching a search and rescue helicopter, but it wouldn't reach him in time if he went in the water. She needed options. She called the Air Wing commander, who was in his office reviewing schedules. "Skipper, we have an emergency. Simmons is going down. What's our closest asset?" The CAG pulled up the air picture on his computer. "We've got a Super Hornet section 20 miles from his position, returning from a training mission." Iris made a decision. Divert them to Simmons. Have them provide visual escort and radio relay. If he has to eject, I want eyes on him immediately so the helicopter knows where to go. The CAG issued the orders. The two Super Hornets altered course and accelerated toward Simmons's position. Iris monitored the radios, listening to the terse communications between pilots. Simmons's voice was calm despite his situation, professional training overriding fear. "Tower, this is Devil 2. Second engine is fluctuating. I'm not going to make the boat." The carrier's air boss responded. "Devil 2, understand. Escort is 3 minutes from your position. SAR helicopter is launching now. Prepare to eject if needed." "Roger, Tower, standing by." The tension in flag spaces was palpable. Everyone knew the statistics. Ejections over water, especially at altitude, had decent survival rates if the pilot followed procedures. But things could go wrong. Equipment could fail. The pilot could get injured. The helicopter might not find them quickly. Iris stood at the radar display and watched the icons converge. Simmons's aircraft slowing, descending. The escort fighters closing. The SAR helicopter lifting from the flight deck. Time stretched. Then one of the escort pilots called, "Tower, Sabre 1 has Devil 2 visual. Altitude 4,000 feet. He's trailing smoke from the right engine." Tower replied, "Copy, Sabre 1. Maintain visual. Devil 2, recommend you eject now while you have altitude." Simmons replied, "Tower negative, I think I can make the deck." Iris felt her stomach tight. Simmons was taking a risk, trying to save the aircraft instead of ensuring his own safety. It was admirable but potentially fatal. She looked at the CAG, who looked at Admiral Patterson. The Admiral picked up the radio and transmitted directly, his flag officer authority clear in his voice. "Devil 2, this is Admiral Patterson. I am ordering you to eject immediately. That is a direct order, eject now." There was a pause, then Simmons replied, "Aye, aye, sir, ejecting." Iris watched the radar. Simmons's icon disappeared as his aircraft fell below the radar's coverage. Then the escort pilot called, "Good shoot, good shoot. Devil 2 is in the water. I have eyes on." The SAR helicopter altered course toward the coordinates the escort pilot provided. 8 minutes later, they had Simmons aboard, wet and bruised but alive. His aircraft was gone, plunging into the South China Sea to become another wreck on the ocean floor. But the pilot was safe. That's what mattered. In the debrief afterward, Simmons explained his thinking. He'd believed he could make it back because the surviving engine seemed stable. He'd wanted to save the $50 million aircraft. He'd thought the risk was acceptable. Admiral Patterson listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Lieutenant, your impulse to save the aircraft is understandable, but aircraft are replaceable. You are not." The Navy would rather lose 100 Super Hornets than one trained pilot. Don't ever forget that. Simmons nodded, properly chastened. Yes, sir, I understand. After he left, Patterson turned to Iris. Good call diverting the escort. Having eyes on him made the rescue much faster, she nodded. Just following procedures, sir, but thank you. It was a reminder of why they trained so relentlessly, why they practiced emergencies and coordinated responses. When things went wrong, and they inevitably did, preparation saved lives. The deployment ended without further drama. They pulled into San Diego in early autumn, sailors and officers exhausted but satisfied. They'd completed their mission successfully, maintained presence in contested waters, supported allies, deterred adversaries. Ira spent a week writing reports and closing out the deployment's administrative requirements. Then she took leave, renting a cabin in the Sierra Nevada mountains and spending 2 weeks hiking and reading and existing without responsibilities. It was the first real break she'd had in 18 months. The solitude was restorative. She sat on the cabin's porch in the evenings, watching sunsets paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple, letting her mind wander without agenda. She thought about her career, about the choices that had brought her here, about the path ahead. Did she want flag rank? The question had no easy answer. Part of her did, the ambitious part that had driven her from childhood dreams to senior captain. But another part wondered if she'd given enough, if maybe it was time to step back and let others carry the burden. She was 43 years old. She'd served 21 years. She'd commanded squadrons, led from the cockpit, influenced tactics and training. She'd proven every doubter wrong and paved paths for those behind her. Maybe that was sufficient contribution. Maybe she could retire with pride and pursue a civilian life. But what would that life be? She had no family, no children, no partner. Her identity was so thoroughly intertwined with military service that she couldn't imagine herself in civilian clothes doing civilian work. Teaching at a university, consulting for defense contractors, flying for airlines, none of it appealed. The military was her home, the Navy was her family, aviation was her purpose. Leaving felt like amputation, removing a fundamental part of herself. So she returned from leave with her answer. She'd continue. She'd pursue Air Wing Command. She'd see where the path led. When she returned to Pearl Harbor, orders were waiting. She was assigned as commander of Carrier Air Wing 3, the air wing assigned to USS Harry S. Truman. It was a major command, responsibility for 9 squadrons and over 2,000 personnel. The job would be challenging and consuming, exactly what she needed. She reported to the air wing in Virginia Beach, taking command in another formal ceremony. Her speech was shorter this time, refined by experience. Excellence is not an accident. It's the result of commitment, preparation, and discipline. This air wing will achieve excellence through those means. I expect your best effort every day. In return, you'll have my full support and leadership. She delivered on that promise through 2 years of intensive operations. They deployed twice, once to the Mediterranean and once to the Arabian Gulf. They conducted combat operations over Syria and Iraq, provided support to ground forces, enforced no-fly zones. The air wing performed superbly, earning recognition from the fleet commander. Iris was mentioned in dispatches, her leadership highlighted as a key factor in the air wing's success. As her tour neared completion, she received a call from the Chief of Naval Personnel. A flag officer's voice, formal but warm. Captain Cale, I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected for promotion to Rear Admiral Lower Half. Congratulations. She felt a complex rush of emotions. Pride, satisfaction, apprehension. This was it, the rank she'd been uncertain about pursuing. Now it was reality. Thank you, sir, I'm honored. The ceremony occurred at the Pentagon in a room full of senior officers and a handful of family members. Her parents had flown in from Oregon, older now but still proud of their daughter who'd exceeded every expectation. The Chief of Naval Operations pinned her Admiral stars and shook her hand. Admiral Cale, welcome to the flag ranks. The Navy needs your leadership. She wore the stars with a mixture of pride and humility. This was the apex of a career that had started with a kid watching jets at an air show. But it was also a beginning, a new phase with different responsibilities. Her first flag assignment was as commander of Carrier Strike Group 9, leading a strike group built around USS John C. Stennis. It was operational command at the highest level, responsibility for a carrier, its escorts, submarines, and the thousands of sailors manning them. She threw herself into the role with characteristic intensity, studying intelligence, planning operations, coordinating with allied forces. The strike group deployed to the Western Pacific, operating in increasingly tense waters as Chinese military expansion continued. It was a high-stakes environment, requiring diplomatic skill combined with military readiness. One night during deployment, standing on the carrier's flag bridge and watching flight operations continue in darkness, Iris Kale thought about the bar incident years earlier. The Marine who'd shoved her, the conversation that followed, the ripples that had spread from that moment. She'd become an admiral, but she was still Ember, still the underestimated pilot who'd proven doubters wrong through competence and determination. The stars on her collar didn't change that fundamental identity. She just carried it higher, used it to open more doors, demonstrated that leadership transcended gender and size and any other superficial characteristic people use to make assumptions. She thought about Lieutenant Chen, now probably a department head in her squadron, carrying forward the lessons Iris had taught. She thought about Petty Officer Daniels, the sailor who'd gotten a DUI, wondering if her decision to give him a second chance had proven wise. She thought about all the people whose lives she'd intersected with over 2 decades, the countless small influences that accumulated into legacy. The aircraft launched and recovered with practiced precision, steam billowing from the catapults, arresting wires catching aircraft with violent deceleration. It was dangerous work, night carrier operations claiming lives regularly. But these sailors did it anyway, motivated by duty and pride, and the bonds forged between warriors. Admiral Iris Kale watched them work and felt privileged to lead them. She'd come a long way from Oregon, from the Naval Academy, from that first terrifying carrier landing, but in essential ways she was unchanged. Still the person who looked at the sky and wanted to fly. Still the warrior who'd do whatever was asked in service to something larger than herself. Still Ember, small and overlooked until someone gave her oxygen and fuel. Then she'd burned bright enough to light the way for others. That was enough. That was everything. The sky above the carrier was crowded with stars, constellations wheeling through darkness unchanged since humans first looked up and wondered. Somewhere below, the ocean stretched to horizons she couldn't see. Somewhere behind, the wake of her career marked passage through time and challenge. Somewhere ahead, the future waited with questions she couldn't answer yet. But tonight, this moment, she was exactly where she belonged, leading from the front, flying higher than gravity allowed but as high as determination could reach. Admiral Iris Kale, United States Navy, call sign Ember, stood on the bridge of an American carrier in contested waters and did her job. Not for recognition, not for thanks, but because someone had to and she was trained for it. Because warriors on the ground needed someone overhead willing to put steel on target. Because the covenant was unbreakable. We'll cover you, always. No matter what. That was her legacy. That was her purpose. That was who she was.